Frank Hyder, and he is, we go way back 30 years now, and he was my life drawing teacher, professor at Moore College of Art and Design my freshman year at art school. So we've been connected, sometimes very loosely, but the wonderful thing about social media is that sometimes things get connected a little bit tighter than before. And so I have known Frank's work for a really long time. I've loved his work. The first pieces that I saw that I really loved, I must have been 21 or 22, and back then I used to shave my head. And I would go to this place on South Street in Philadelphia, a hair cuttery that was very punk rock. And on the wall in that, you know exactly what hairdresser I was at, but there was a giant painting, probably 8 feet, 10 feet long and 8 feet tall, and it was the koi fish paintings that were carved in wood, and I was like, and I looked at that and I was like, who did that? And my buzzer, she said, oh, that's Frank Hyder, and I was like, that's my art professor. So I'm really pleased to have him come. He is living in Miami now, although we were in Philadelphia when we knew each other before, and my son incidentally went to school in Miami in the fall, and so my husband and I took some time to come and visit him in his studio, and he gave us not only a great tour of his studio and gallery, but where his studio is the Wynwood Art District, and if you've been to Miami, you know where that is. It's incredible, and it's every single surface is painted with murals, blocks after blocks after blocks, and I don't think that there is a surface that's not embellished or painted on, and it's just pretty incredible. So after that, in that studio visit, I think it might have even been this one. It was a little one. He said, watch this, and he plugged this thing into the wall, and this thing just kind of like came to life, and I was like, what is that? And that was awesome, and so that born the idea of like, well, I gotta have Frank come, and I can't pay for him to have those big giant paintings out of wood, and these are perfect because they travel. They travel really well. So we're excited to have him here just for this pop-up exhibit. It's kind of a pilot idea that we are having. We're booked in all of our galleries for like almost 3 years. So in order for us to do things and be responsive and bring exciting things on a more kind of spontaneous way, this kind of pop-up exhibit idea is, we are practicing with him. So I am glad that you are here to embark on this adventure, and I introduce to you Mr. Frank Hyder.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I'll try to make this as painless as possible. I know Christina's worried that it's going to go on War and Peace style, but we'll see. I do actually have prepared written remarks that I put a fair amount of effort into, and they have them here. They'll be accessible to anyone who wants them, but I will use that as a rough outline as I meander through the tale. I am a storyteller, and I will tell you a tale. And this tale that I'm going to make for you is related to this event. And I'm going to drag it through a large swath of history and bring it into this place. I'm beginning with this image of this museum that I captured off the internet. Those words are usually installed into the image so that people like me won't take the image and put it on in a talk. But I disregard those words. What I want to talk about is the store-like front access that this museum presents is very, very critical to the character of the museum itself. It's inviting, It's at the street level. You can just casually step right in the door. And whoever thought of that was thinking very much in this moment, and the museum is really skilled and placed in this time. And I'm going to refer to a few things here. Museums, the history of museums is really very, very short. There were museums, and the oldest museum we are aware of is in ancient Babylonia, 530 BC, and it was a collection of a daughter of a king who amassed a collection of Babylonian artwork or craftsmanship that moved through several centuries. When the space was discovered, it was very clear that she had just put these pieces in a particular way so she could compare one to the other. Now, there is no other museum that we found so far that predates this and this experience. Museums were not existent. They were collections of rulers, of governments, but they were not collected with the same idea behind the way things are collected today. Moving forward in time, the next image I'm going to show you is going to be, this is the Louvre Museum in Paris. The Louvre is one of the world's greatest museums. And you look at this and you think, oh, this goes back to ancient time. Not true. It was founded by Napoleon in 1804. Why? And no, it was part of the mentality of the moment. Napoleon was a soldier, but he was a student of the Enlightenment. He was very well read, and he thought in broad terms. And in those days, the first naturalists, biologists, doctors, they were just beginning to study the world around them. It was breaking free from the church of the Middle Ages, which explained everything. It was always God's fault or God's great idea. That's the way it went. So when Napoleon had 29 campaigns in his career, and on every one of his campaigns, he sent 450 scientists. In those days, they weren't called scientists, they were called naturalists, or people who studied rocks or studied different elements. So he sent these people on every expedition, and they gathered anything they could find and brought it back to Paris. So suddenly now, you have in Paris, works of art. His first campaign was in Italy, and he cleaned out Milan, brought tons of wonderful things back to Paris. Then on to Egypt, and he cleaned out Egypt, and he brought the great Rosetta Stone, which became the key to translation of hieroglyphics. So the first person who could read a tomb of an ancient pharaoh in 2,000 years was a Frenchman, 21 years after Napoleon brought that stone back to Paris. So he gathered all of these things, and to show his enlightenment, he wanted to share them with the people of France. They were not just Napoleon's treasures, they were to be treasured by all Frenchmen. It was the key to his enormous popularity with the French, is he believed in the French people more than anyone in history ever had. And he opened a museum. At first it was called Museo Napoleon, but they changed the name to the Louvre after he met a different fate. So anyway, it remains one of the great museums in the world. Now, in the United States, in the 19th century, I'm going to go forward here. This thing is not working my way. In the United States, in New York, in 1870, this building was built. This is the Metropolitan. This is not the Holter Museum.
Oh, it's going.
It's moving? Oh, I'm sorry. I'll go back.
That I
Please
can
let me.
guarantee that is not the.
I'm having technical problems. All right, sorry. All right, I'm going to keep it here. This does not just sit on the street and you just wander in. You have to rise up a staircase, go through this big portal. It's very imposing. It is one of the world's greatest museums. Why was it in New York at that time? Because the rich robber barons were acquiring wealth in the same way that that Napoleon was in Europe. They were buying up the estates of the falling royals who were selling off for anything they could get. And so the city of New York the museum was created by very rich people who had done a lot of not so nice things. And they thought, oh, if we create a museum, maybe our memory will be a good one. They'll remember us in a good light. So anyway, that was the origin of this museum. I'm going to try this again. In Philadelphia, this building is now the existing home of what's known as the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. This is the first museum in the United States. It was founded in 1804, at the same time as the Louvre was being founded in Paris. This was founded by one of the founders, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, Charles Wilson Peel, who was an artist, who was known to every intellectual in America. He's the first collector of dinosaur bones, the first, what we consider as maybe an archaeologist, maybe a paleontologist, but he was an artist. And he created a center. His museum, which wasn't this building, it was an earlier one, was a learning center. People who went there, you might know of a few. One of them was by the name of the Lewis and Clark expedition. They went to see Mr. Peel because they needed to know how to draw. And they drew hundreds of images of everything they found when they came here into this area and everywhere they went. It's hard to believe, but Ulysses S. Grant had more drawing classes when he was at West Point than any art student in the United States gets now if they go to art school. Okay? Every general, every soldier who went to West Point could draw anything they saw. All right? So, Lewis and Clark went there before they embarked into this territory to have the skills to bring the information back. And because Charles Wilson Peel was the greatest naturalist in the United States at that time, he showed them how to preserve samples of plants and animals and things like that. Another person who came to see Mr. Peel was a young Pennsylvanian by the name of John James Audubon, who went on to be the greatest drawer of American birds in the history. And one more. I'm going to continue here a little bit. I'm going to mention one other thing. This is an obelisk. This was from King Tutmos. And this obelisk was in Thebes, but it was brought to Istanbul by Emperor Constantine in 325 AD. Why? He was building Nueva Roma, which we now call Istanbul. He built the city in 20 years. And he brought everything. There was a Colosseum equal to Rome, a hippodrome equal to Rome. Everything Rome had was built in Istanbul. But one thing that didn't exist in Rome, that only in the mind of Constantine, he brought examples of great things from every part of the Roman Empire and put them all over the city. So if you were a Roman in Nueva Roma, you walked down the street and you knew you were part of an empire that recognized your roots. There was an Egyptian obelisk. There was a piece from Greece. There was a piece from Sardinia, etc. And here, I'm going to show you one more piece from that. These horses, which you may recognize if you've been to Venice, they were brought by Constantine from ancient Greece to Nueva Roma. This thing is, I'm sorry. Okay.
Do you want me to drive it for you?
Want me to what?
Frank, do you want me to drive the slideshow for you?
No, I'll get it.
Okay.
So anyway, these horses Constantine brought to Istanbul, and then in 1236, the First Crusade, they stole it from Istanbul and brought it to Venice, where it still is. Okay? So there's a tradition of taking things from one place to another place, right? You might call it archaeology, you might call it collecting, or you could call it stealing. Depends on your point of view, okay? But this whole notion had never been done before Constantine instituted the idea. It was an original thought on his part. This man here came to meet Charles Willson Peale when he was very young, and he wanted painting lessons because he had an interesting idea. That's okay, this one's okay. His idea was he was going to go into the West. Before any settlers, anyone had been in the West, he walked into the West with a paint box and paintbrush. And he spent 10 years wandering through the tribes of the Americas. There's a red line, it's not real bright in this image, you can see. He walked all the way across, you see up there, he spent a lot of time with the Iowa Indians, all right? He went all the way up into the Pacific Northwest, goes all the way down the coast of California, all the way down through Texas, comes out to the Caribbean, and ultimately ended all the way down in Patagonia. So he did both North and South America. And his name was George Catlin. You've never heard of him. Some people, that's good. But imagine what he was doing. No, he didn't go in with a gun. He went in with a paintbrush. And he knew from childhood, when he was 8 years old, he confronted an Iroquois Indian in the woods. And he realized that the Indian did him no harm because he did nothing. And they just gave a sign to each other, and it stayed with him that if I don't bother these people, they're not going to mess with me. So he made 565 paintings of the Indians of the Americas, which is a serious amount. And these are some. By the way, you see that handprint? I've seen this in town in different places. Do you know what that means? It means that this warrior was very effective in hand-to-hand combat. So he gets to put that handprint on his face. Okay? So now, after he gets done, George takes his art back to New York. Nobody cared. He went to Philadelphia. Nobody cared. So what he ended up doing was going to Europe. And in Europe, he came up with a very novel idea. There were not museums. There were not art galleries. There was none of this. So in Europe, what he did was he had a huge canvas that he painted a river on. And it was a guy on two sides, like a stage like this, and it was on a roll. And he would stand on the stage and he would read his story as they would turn the roll, and it looked like they were moving down the river on a boat, right? So he was taking the people into the American West. And after he had lured them in with this tale, he then passed around a hat and he put in a penny, and you got to go into a room and see these. And they were the paintings that he had made in the American West. And that was how he lived, was as a showman. Not trying to sell the paintings, but basically just going around and doing a little stage show. I took this picture in London, at the National Portrait Gallery of London. I was startled when I saw the installation. In a few minutes you're going to see why I was startled, because it touched me in a way that I wasn't prepared for. But anyway, Mr. Catlin lived a very long life. At the end of his life, the Smithsonian Institution was being created. He's the first artist that the Smithsonian brought in to be part of their organization. And they acquired his paintings. So he really only lives a few months after this, but they bought his paintings and it became the first part of the collection of the Smithsonian. But it was he walking this land, making those paintings, and then bringing them back. So this is an installation of my work that I made after my trip to the Amazon. Do you see the relationship between George Catlin, right? So yeah, this is my installation. This is the way I came up with installing them. And I had never seen Catlin's installation. That's why I almost fainted when I saw how he did it, because they were really very similar, right? And my motives were similar. I was not necessarily trying to sell them. I was trying to make a presentation about the things that I was seeing. So anyway, then moving along a little bit here. Change, please. Okay. Here's one more person that I'm going to talk to you about. That is Paul Gauguin. You've heard the name before? Yeah. It changed again? Okay. Jesus. All right. Paul Gauguin was a Frenchman who was born in Paris, but his father and mother, his mother was Peruvian, and his father and mother took him to Peru before he was able to learn to talk. His father died shortly after they arrived in Peru, so he was raised by his mother, his mother's mother, and his mother's mother's mother, in a family who believed they were descendants of the Incas, royals. And so he was taught that these objects were beautiful. This is a piece that Paul Gauguin made when he returned to Paris in his early 20s. Do you see the influence of the Peruvian art in his work, right? So, Gauguin did not speak French until he was 17. He only spoke Spanish. That's his first language. When he gets to Paris, he took an apartment, and his father's family, gave him a job. His apartment happened to be next door to a French artist who had a kind of an American history also, a person by the name of Edgar Degas. And Mr. Degas entertained him and would bring him in and show him his work and introduced him to his friends. He learned to paint from Degas in that experience. And Degas became a collector of his work in time, right? So now, Gauguin was in Paris at a moment when Paris was being transformed by modernity. They were building the Eiffel Tower. People in Paris they were beginning to have trolley cars. They had electric lights before any other city had them. And Parisians were all kind of longing for the old days. They wanted to go back when Paris was cleaner and simpler, didn't have all this modernity. So it was kind of a popular idea among artists to search for an ideal world. So one of the worlds that Gauguin went to was in Brittany, in France, before he went to Polynesia. And then he spent some time in the south of France with, history has made him his best friend, a guy by the name of Vincent van Gogh. They were only together for 11 weeks. But if you read the history books, it sounds like they were together for 40 years. It was 11 tumultuous weeks where Gauguin was basically living off the brother of Vincent van Gogh's money, and that's, and they had a budget that Gauguin drew up. So they had, at the top of the list was art materials, next was alcohol, then prostitutes, and then at the very bottom was rent. All right? So that was the life that they were living. So it didn't end well. So anyway, Gauguin went to Polynesia, and he really found what he was looking for, a dream world, a world where it was a world before modernity. How real it is, I don't know. I think it's a fraction made up. Some of it's real, some of it he saw, and some he just put together. So, anyway, now, this is a painting by a Flemish artist whose name is Peter Paul Rubens. This is the painting that made me want to be an artist. It's changed, God, this thing is really driving me nuts.
You can just use the double
Forgive me.
arrow or something. You don't have to hit play, you just hit play.
I'll get it. This is a painting called Prometheus Bound.
Alright.
And Prometheus Bound was by Peter Paul Rubens, who was a Flemish artist who lived in the 1500s. He went to all. I'm so sorry.
Don't.
You can just hit the double.
This painting is in the Philadelphia Museum. I was 5 years old when I saw it for the first time, and I have never forgotten it. It became the painting for me that figured out what a great art should be. And this painting was painted in Flanders. Rubens traveled around Europe his whole life. He made 4,000 paintings in every capital of Europe. If you go to St. Petersburg, there are 50 great Rubens. If you go to Madrid, there's 200 great Rubens. If you go to London, there's 1,000 great Rubens. He was everywhere in Europe. Besides being an artist, he was a diplomat. He's the only artist in history who negotiated a treaty to end the 30 Years' War. And no artist ever has done anything like it before or since, okay? He traded with a Dutch merchant who lived in a new city called New Amsterdam, this painting and 2 others. They shipped them to Europe. They're the first works of Italian Renaissance masters to arrive in the New World. And this painting was influential in making me do what I do. But note, all the artists I'm talking about traveling, they're moving around a lot. They're not like comfortable, they're moving around a bit. So, now, this artist is one of my first teachers. This is Alex Katz standing in his studio next to one of his paintings. There's another picture in his studio. Alex Katz is 96 years old, and he had a show at the Guggenheim this past year of the entire museum. He's still working like insane. These are recent photographs. And he was instrumental in teaching me as a young artist about scale and about color and things like that. And then this is the other influential person who I studied with. This is an American painter by the name of Neil Welliver. And Neil Welliver is also a famous American painter for translating abstract expressionist techniques into what we would call realistic landscape, all right? And Neil taught me to step into the landscape to make my images. Or he said, you know, whatever you're going to paint, get involved with it. Be engaged in it in a particular way. The next artist that came on the screen we'll go back to, this is a German painter by the name of Anselm Kiefer. And Anselm Kiefer is what we call a neo-expressionist. He's a post-World War II artist. And his work uses landscape, but he wants to discuss the world's destruction because he was he was born in Nazi Germany. And he grew up in bombed out, destroyed Germany. And he's made his career about talking about a landscape destroyed, all right? So these people influence my thinking, that art should be meaningful, art should be willing to travel, it should be willing to engage people. And so in a little bit, I'm a little bit of a disruptor, and these people are all disruptors as well. And it doesn't necessarily make you successful, but it makes life entertaining, all right? So now, this is me in my studio in Miami, so you can see the kinds of paintings. Is that so small? Anyway, the kinds of paintings that I make, besides making what you saw outside. So let's see if I can move this on. Here's another landscape of mine. And I've spent the last 30 years going into Latin America, into the forests of Venezuela, in Colombia, in Mexico, in Honduras, Nicaragua. And I trot around and I make things. I've been doing shows, and I have a show right now in a small museum in the Andes Mountains. I have another, I'm in a show in Caracas, Venezuela. I'm in something else in Medellin, Colombia. So I have a lot of things out there in different places, and I'm pretty happy with that because I really, as an American, I look at the Americas from the top of Canada all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. That is the American territory. We share so much with those people. The languages differ a little bit, but if you had been an American in Philadelphia in 1780 and you left Philadelphia and walked to Lancaster, you probably would have heard 15 different languages spoken because nobody was really speaking English, you know. It was the language of the people who ran the shop, but not the guys who worked in the back. So anyway, no, we'll move along here. This is me standing in front of big heads. I had a show at that museum at the Pennsylvania Academy, which was one of the great, powerful shows of my life. I was very pleased to have it. And these are made out of wood, carved wood, and nailed back together again. And it went from New York, it went to New York after that show at the museum, and all the paintings went to Europe. So they were gone. I haven't seen them. They're, you know. So anyway, I've had the great lot. You know, the idea of many of my work traveled around. So you know, I've had galleries in Singapore, galleries in London, galleries in Switzerland, galleries in Caracas, in Bogota, in Toronto, in Vancouver. So the work gets out there, you know, which is kind of a nice thing. So let's see here. And this is me as a young guy in my first show in New York City. And you can see faces are always part of my work, and expression is part of my work, and feeling. You know, these are made, carved, and painted into wooden panels. And so that was how I made my reputation as a young man. These are actually some of the paintings that are in the windows here. This is in my studio in the mountains of Venezuela, where my wife and I and our children lived for a year in a cloud forest on a Fulbright grant. And I did 175 paintings on this scale in that space in a year. And it was a great experience. All the paper that you get a chance, you can see the backside when I get stopped talking, you can go up and look. My wife and I made the paper, but she made most of these paper. I came up with the idea, but she was the day force. She did all the work. Then what we would do is gather plants from the forest around us and embed them into layers of lamination of paper. And then I would paint on them because I really wanted the sense that I was painting on the floor of the forest. And that was part of what I was trying to do. And then I installed them. This is a museum show I had in Maracaibo. And this show opened the same week that the United States invaded Iraq. And at my opening, I was fielding questions about the war in Iraq, and nobody wanted to talk about my paintings. You know? So, but the embassy warned me that's what's going to happen, so prepare yourself. So I got to it okay. But anyway, as you can see here, they're installed so you can walk around them, because I really was interested in this idea that the paintings were like the forest that I had lived in, that it was all around me. You could walk through them. This is a painting I made probably about 8-10 years later. This is called The Frontier. And the idea here is, what I would do is I made the faces on separate pieces of paper. Then I cut them out randomly and pasted them onto sheets of mylar. And then I improvised all the other stuff around it. So I had no idea what this was going to look like until I was done. And it was really a fun idea. And the best part of it is, you're going to see, it was translucent. So I installed this in an art fair in a staircase, a glass staircase, so you could walk down the stairs and see from both sides of the stairs into the piece. And here's another installation of it, and another set of windows, right? And then lastly, this is the first inflatable that I was making. All of this work was kind of going on at the same time, so it's not like just one thing. I'm a little schizophrenic in the sense that I work for 5 or 6 days on this side of the room, then I move over there, and then I come back over there maybe in a week or so. You know, I have a big room and I wander around, and Christina knows that she's been there. And it's a horrible mess, but I sort of understand it. So anyway, this is the first inflatable I ever made. This was the first time I exhibited one, and you can see it's rather large. And then after I showed it, this was in Miami for Art Basel. After there, I took it to the Andes Mountains, and I drove from village to village and would set it up in the middle of the town, and everybody in town would come and find out what was happening. And it was great fun. And what I was doing was taking art out into the world in a way that very few people were doing it, all right? And so that was a lot of fun. And here is, this piece is right outside right now, and there it is displayed downtown in Miami when I first made it. And if you've gotten outside, you notice it has a window that you can look inside, and there's painting on the inside. Before I made the inflatables, I started making sculptures using bamboo and paper that were kind of hollow and empty, but allowed me to make forms. When I was presented with the possibility of making inflatables, I saw the connection, and I said yes, not knowing what I was setting myself up for. And every time I made an inflatable, all I could see was the things I could have done differently. So these early ones are all very large, 30 feet, and they cost a lot to make, and I made a million mistakes, and they were very frustrating, and so I only would make 1.5 a year or so, you know? And then, that's when you look inside, that's what you see. So, and also, I'll point this out, notice it's black on the outside. Well, it's black on the inside, but when the light goes in, it turns white. I don't know why, but it always works. So, I have no idea. And this was a show I did in Baltimore at the Maryland Institute with a whole bunch of my inflatables together. They brought me in to give a talk, and we set up the inflatables, and that was a lot of fun. And this piece was the first of the big faces that I made. When I made this, the original design, what I would do is make a maquette. I'd send the maquette to some guys in Mexico who would make something, I'd get it back, and then try to figure out how to fix it. And so, the only thing I could do, this looked like a big potato. So I decided I'll paint it, and I turned it into this. It took me 4 days to paint this. There it is in exhibition in New York in a big space, and you notice on the wall behind those paintings, the frontier images against the windows, they're 7 feet wide and 12.5 feet tall. That's an installation shot from across the room looking at all of them against the windows. And I won't labor it, but hanging them up, everyone left the room because it was the scariest thing anyone had ever seen, because we were using a ladder that wasn't tall enough, and my wife was holding it, and those were bleachers, and we were set up in those bleachers, and it was 24 feet in the air, but with the bleachers, we were 10 feet higher, so it was in the 30-foot range, right? It scared everybody to death, and believe me, I was really scared. But I had to do it. No one else would do it. Then I got invited by Fabergé to make an egg, and I thought it was a joke, almost. And I made the egg. And I made an egg, and I made a golden exterior on the egg. I was one of 260 artists they invited. I made a golden exterior, and then I painted these fish on it, and I called it caviar, which is Russian for fish egg, right? And it was so popular. In New York, it made the New York Times. I was like, what? I thought it was a joke, you know, but it turned out, so I said, something to be noted, the shape was very popular. I have this job a couple of times a year. I work for a cruise ship, a luxury cruise line that has an art studio. And they put me on the ship as artist in residence. So I give workshops. So you see, that's what I'm doing here. People are learning how to make little paintings. I'm teaching something there. And they take me around the world. So I was in Polynesia for 30 days doing this. And all the ship would change guests all the time. And all these people were telling me about the race problem that was developing in the United States. And I was extremely curious. I didn't know what they were talking about. And but it stayed on my mind. And I'm in that situation, I can't like say, what the hell are you talking about? I just have to listen and nod my head, you know? And so when I left Polynesia, I went to Easter Island. And on Easter Island, I saw these big heads, and I came up with an idea. And I said, I'm going to combine the egg with these faces, and I'm going to make something that I can talk about what I'm feeling. So I designed this thing, and I ended up giving it 2 faces, and I realized when I saw the 2 faces, I remembered from my art history classes the Janus figure, which was the Roman god Janus, who was the god of new endeavors. The only god the Romans ever invented, besides Christianity, and the only god they ever really invented, and it always could be looking forward because they were always looking back. And it allowed Rome to change directions wherever they wanted. So I took that idea and I began to design in paper. This is a computerized, giving a sense of scale. So this is the first beginning. And then I would get this and print it out and then draw on top of it, then photograph it, put it back into the program, etc. And then this is the byproduct, one of the first inflatables before anything happens to it. This is the original design for that. Then I changed the color. One side would be one would be the other. The point is, we all come from an egg. Doesn't matter what color we are, there's just one egg. All people can intermarry with all other people. The human, all genetically are identical, okay? So, I made this image, and I liked it. Then I produced it, and here it is. When I got this, I said, I did it. I knew I had broken through into another place. And it sat in my studio for about a week before I knew what to do next. And what I did next was to paint it. After I painted, I said, I'm done. It's like everything else. Now what do I do? And somebody saw the picture and they said, could you take that on one of our ships? And I said, sure I could. So I went into the home office in Miami and I sat down and we put together a Norwegian cruise line paid for me to go to Europe for 3 months. And I went every day for 90 days and set these things up. The first one, everywhere I could find. And it resulted in all sorts of interesting things. This is a grouping of them in a show that I did in a museum in Florida. There are 29 of these now. So here's a bigger group, all right? And no two are made, they're all sewn the same way. I use the same design, but I keep changing the shapes, and the way I paint them is changing all the time. Here they are at the Pennsylvania Academy, the first museum in the United States, which was nice. Here, this is the Art Students League in New York on 57th Street. This is the Michener Museum in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. 4 months with my inflatables inside and out, and some of my other work continuing. This is a fiberglass piece. I translated it into fiberglass. I had to learn how to do this. I met a Frenchman in Miami who knows how to make fiberglass pieces. Pretty good background he had. His father was the fabricator for Juan Miró, the Spanish artist. His grandfather was the fabricator for Rodin, and his great-grandfather made the molds for the Statue of Liberty. And so he makes molds with me. He's a wonderful guy. So this is installed in front of City Hall in Boynton Beach. So they light up and they look really different at night and in the daytime. This works off of solar cells, so it works pretty well. This is in Cartagena, Colombia. That's Simon Bolivar and Janis together. My Janis, by the way, is spelled with an I-S because I wanted to lose the Roman declension of masculine. I wanted it to be neither masculine or feminine. Here I am in the Andes Mountains of Peru. Here another shot from the mountains in the Andes. That's me carrying the pack that I built to carry the Janises through the mountains. I went up to Machu Picchu. This is on the street in Ecuador. In Mexico, by a pyramid. My job was to get it as close to as much great art as I could find. Right? Here it is at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. I want you to know the federal guards are very rigorous. They were on me like a cheap suit in no time. This is in front of the National Constitution Center. This is at a farm. This is what they look like at night. They light up. And I've made billboards. I've made the world of advertising even, right? And this is in a more garden setting. This is in front of the cathedral in Barcelona. Sagrada Familia and Janis. So I've been lugging these things all over the place. And it's tedious at times, you know, but in the end it's worthwhile. And here, this is the cathedral at night lit up with Janis in front. This is in Tallinn, Estonia. This is the spot where Lech Wałęsa started the Solidarity movement in Poland. And 20 minutes after I was there with that sculpture, the president of Poland was giving a speech because it was the 80th anniversary of the beginning of World War II. This is gold leaf bronze Janis. Looks like King Tut, right? This is what you see the figure standing up. So it's 6 feet tall. It weighs over 500 pounds. And then, this is kind of running. I began to make paintings during the pandemic of the travels of Janis. We couldn't go anywhere, so we went in my mind. And this is just some of those small paintings that I was making. And this is the latest manifestation. This is cement. This is in front of an art center on the Hudson River outside of New York City. And again, I'm experimenting here, but it made it through the winter with no cracks, so I know we're good. I was just up there 2 weeks ago, and I went over it like a detective completely. Here is one. Someone bought one, and it's on their patio, and then this is at the Pennsylvania Academy. This piece was at the Pennsylvania Academy. It was in China. All of them have been in many different places. So there's a grand staircase in Paris. If you talk to me long enough, I'll convince you to let me do this, right? Here the police were not interested in my story. This is at the Museum of the American Art in Philadelphia. This is on the streets in Chicago. I rented them to the city of Chicago for 3 days, and we did setups all over Monroe Street. This is in Brazil, in front of a big mural on the wall. This is on the sands of Ipanema. And then lastly, this is in upstate New York, on the Hudson, and this is an installation I did with a very well-known artist by the name of Ron English, who is standing there to my left, I guess. And the man in the striped shirt is Ethan Cohen, who is my art dealer in New York. And this installation, Ethan said, we're doing back to school, come up with an idea. So what I did was I put the inflatables together around a giant one, and the idea is the teacher and its students. And so it was very nice and very successful. So that's pretty much my story. And we called the show Off the Wall because all the stuff is not on the walls, but it really is in the museum that's designed to reach out to the people and create a conversation. So the last thing we're going to do, you can see on the stage, that package is the Janis carry-all. It's designed so that I can just walk up to an airport and put it down in luggage, and it goes in. And so I can leave here and be in Paris, and in 10 minutes in Paris be erecting these things and creating a conversation, which is an enormous change. I spent my youth learning how to paint in nature, standing in forests, in falling through ice, getting bit by mosquitoes, getting, all kinds of things. Now you can see how easily this is going to go up. And
this one's easier than the whale.
What's that?
This one's easier than the whale.
Yeah, much easier. The whale's much tougher. But all of this is and so now I have made these at my own expense. They are not cheap to make. I do sell them, and I have sold some. And I know eventually they'll all get sold. But that's not my purpose. If you want to buy one, I'll be happy to sell one. But I would also probably make you a brand new one that'll look just like the one. Because these things have had some hard traveling, and I want you to get the full life. But there are people who have bought them from me. There's one down in Kansas City. There's one up in Toronto. There's one in Cape Cod. There's another one in Texas. There's another one in California. They're out there, right? So what's cool about this, you saw it go up. And it becomes a hit of any party it's in. And it lights up, right? It changes color. And when you don't want it, you can fold it up and put it in your closet in the hallway, or you can take it with you when you travel. So it really changes the nature of collecting. So I started by talking about how someone in 530 BC had made a collection, and I'm telling you that the notion of collecting has changed through time, and I think I have a position in that in that dialogue that's related to George Catlin and to Rubens and some other people in history who have chosen to hit the highway as opposed to stay at home and do it that way. So does anybody have any questions at all? Yes?
You had said that Reuben, the painting that Reuben did inspired you, so
Absolutely.
how or why?
Well, I was a little kid, and I just stood in front of this thing, and it just washed over me. It was like, it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It's got this big naked guy who's getting, this bird is pulling out his lip. You know the story of Prometheus, right? Prometheus is that gave fire to man, and the god Zeus was angry. How dare you give the man the same power we have? So he condemned Prometheus to be chained to a mountain forever, and every day a bird would come and eat his liver, and every night his liver would regenerate, and the next day the bird would come back and eat him up again. How did the Greeks know that the only organ in the body that can regenerate is the liver? And what was the point of that story? Well, Prometheus is a character that represents knowledge, that represents, leaving superstition and stepping into the real world. And as I said, I kind of look at these heads as being symbols of truth. There's a certain truth that they say. They're not beating you over the head with it. You can't deny the biological truth that they tell. And you can ignore them, you can walk away. Most people just smile. Some kids walk over and touch them, but it's a truth. And so for me, when I take them around, I'm just trying to spread that truth a little bit, one person at a time. It's not making big news. I've been written about and things, but in this day and age, you get big news by being angry, by saying bad things about something as opposed to trying to say something relatively positive. That will change. That's not forever. And that, I believe in the long arc of art history as opposed to the short pop. Another question? Yes, sir.
When I see art, I always have a fascination with eyes. And
Yes.
you seem to use the face quite often. Do you think that you have a fascination with a specific
Well, we look in the
avenue?
mirror.
Yeah.
And we imagine and we see sometimes the real thing and sometimes what we want to see. The history of art from ancient times, there's faces come into the picture because we're talking to ourselves. When I was a student, I was taught that ancient people really, art was started in, maybe the Cro-Magnons made some cave art or something, but we now know that Neanderthals made art. I mean, life was not easy in those days, and they still found that art had a meaning. And what would we know about Egypt or Rome if it wasn't for their art? What would we know? We are in danger in this country of making so many temporary structures, so poorly built, so temporary in so many ways, and then we're storing everything on technology that is obsolete in 5 years. You can't read it anymore. I can't correct things. I'm just telling you that art is an essential. If I had a room full of children, everyone in this room would believe everything I just said, because they would believe in it, the power of art. They love color. You in a room with children and a red goes on, and they scream. It fills them with passion, right? So we turn that down on ourselves. Some of it's sociological, your brother says, that's not so good. And you start feeling a little insecure, or as you get a little older, you say, I don't want to be with that sissy stuff. And there's a whole bunch of methods. Or you might have had a teacher who said, that's not very good. Whatever. I mean, things happen to people in their lives. But you were born to make art. 3 things that people can do that no other animal do. Make art, talk, and write. Those are all art forms. You can sing. We're not all Pavarotti, but we all can sing. We can make art. And if we ask ourselves, we love art. And we've taught ourselves to reject that in ourselves. A big part of the Protestant ethic is denial of the beauty of the outside world to search for the eternal beauty of the spiritual world. And I think those are ideas. Truth is what I'm interested in. And people make art everywhere on the planet. It's not a diabolical scheme, it's an inherent human trait. And faces are really critical in that dialogue. There's other things that are critical too, but faces are very important. Anybody else have another question? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out why the inflatable aspect of these, I mean, is such a critical part of it, at least in my mind, because I see your fiberglass ones and I
Yeah.
see your concrete
Yeah.
ones, and they don't have the same power. Part of it's because of the paint,
Probably the color.
but part of it is the color, but it's something about the inflatable aspect too.
Well,
I've
yeah.
been thinking about this, because I
Okay.
agree with you, Richard. For me, it's almost what draws me to them is that they have a breath. Because they're inflated and there is air moving through, that's what makes them have just a very interesting
Well,
feeling.
note that I still make them, all right? It's not like a passing fancy, all right? And I've invested pretty heavily in these things. I believe in them, and my wife, who's standing in the back, will tell you that if I'm certain that first inflatable, if everything I ever made was destroyed, I'd want that to survive. Because I know that thing has more personality than almost anything else, all right? So I can't control how people respond to things. But I can tell you also, when I started making them, a lot of my artist friends said, nah, this is not a good idea. And once, I don't do things casually. I spend a lot of energy on, like the talk that I put together for here. I spent some time doing a little research on the city. I really didn't talk about the founder's name on here, but I went back to his genealogy. I read about what his father and grandfather, and I know what he did, and so I find myself in all kinds of rabbit holes, reading all kinds of things and looking at all kinds of stuff. But in the end, what I really, I believe after I've come to that thought process, I'm not going to be dissuaded. I'm not going to be told I'm wrong. I was awfully arrogant when I was young, and as an art student, I was explaining to someone earlier today, I was very blessed. Those people I worked with, they were the best. They were the top shelf of the world of the arts, all right? They're still on top, and they were still great when I worked with them. And they were like my artistic fathers. They gave me the power, that's an important thing. The mentoring that they gave me made my life a better life. So anyway, everything I make, I'd like everyone to like everything I make, but I'm going to let you in some news. It doesn't happen that way. I have people only like these, only like that, only like that. I just have to take it. If you had children, they're not all the same. And some people really have one child that everybody loves and the other kids, that's not how you as a parent feel about them. You have to appreciate them for what they are and make the best of that relationship between yourselves. And that's how I feel about the work I make. So, it would be smart from a business standpoint to devote myself to this, create venues for showing them, getting them out there, become a household name. But that's not why I became an artist. I became an artist for other reasons. I had a big story I wanted to tell. I wanted to be part of something that was beyond the bank, if that makes any sense.
I wasn't trying to imply that you should keep
Oh, no.
making.
That's fine. I use the question as a diving board to jump into another part. Yes, sir.
In a lot of ancient languages, dealing with Christina's question about the inflatable, but it's the same wind, or the same word that means wind, breath, spirit,
Right.
pneumatical to some degree,
Right.
like tires were pneumatic,
Right.
but I think that's probably a less than obvious dimension in your work, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
The
but
fact
it's
that
part of
it's
it.
filled with wind, breath, spirit.
Absolutely, but I'm very much, it's part of it. I mentioned earlier the weight of carrying these big, the work that gave me my reputation in New York was heavy, and having shows was really difficult. And the work I'm doing now, I can put together a show in a rather efficient way, and I don't think they're any less powerful, So, I know that, as I said, I'm having a good time. And at my age, a lot of people are spending their time thinking about the old days. I'm so busy thinking about what I have to do next month and the month after that. I have no time to go back, all right? So my dance card is really full, and I'm so fortunate. When I was that 19-year-old kid standing next to these master artists, I was so full of myself, you know. I was certain I was going to do something. And I'll tell you a very funny short story. One of those guys was he's been mentored by Joseph Albers, who's a great German expressionist painter, came to America, and the most important educator in the United States in the history of the 20th century in art education. Nobody more powerful. And he was his hand-chosen successor at Yale, my teacher.
Black Mountain.
What's that?
He was at Black Mountain.
At the Black Mountain, he was at Black Mountain. So, anyway, he studied with Joseph Albers at Yale, and after Yale he went to New York and he spent 2 years in the studio making his work, and then he had a show. And he got a phone call one day in the studio, and he said, he picked up the phone, and I recognized it was Joseph on the phone.
Wow.
And I said, hello, Joseph. He said, Neil, I saw your show. And he said, oh, great. He said, I saw it 3 times. He said, oh, I'm really impressed. He said, Neil, do you think those paintings have color? I said, yeah. He said, well, they don't. He told me that story, and I said, what the hell did he tell me that story? I don't know what this means. 15 years later, when Neil retired, I go to his retirement party. There's hundreds of people there. And I saw him over there. I'm standing at the door talking to someone, and like a shark, he moved through the crowd right at me. I hadn't talked to him in years, right? He comes right up, pushes the person I'm talking to away like they were in his way, and he puts his finger at my face and he said, you. I said, Neil, it's great to see you. He said, you. And I said, yes. He said, I've been seeing your work all over the place. And I said, oh, well, that's nice. And he said, it looks good, keep it up. And then he punched me. And I knew what the other story meant. And what it meant was, he hadn't done what his mentor had wanted him to do, but his mentor couldn't deny that he was doing something that he couldn't deny. And what he was telling me was, I didn't do what he wanted me to do, but he couldn't deny what I was doing. All right? And that's just how it works sometimes.
Well, to an artist like Anselm Kiefer, who I gather
Yes.
overlaps with your story. I mean, ashes maybe mean something.
Everything means something. We just have to look for the meaning. Things don't happen casually. Things happen. They always mean something. We don't always know the answer. And you know, I was a great believer. I loved, Mallory McCourt, who was a great writer, Frank McCourt. I went to a lecture and he gave, and someone said, after all these years of ranting about religion and all this stuff, how do you feel about it now? He said, I'll tell you how I feel about it. I believe in mysteries.
Yeah.
And I wanted to jump up and say, yes, because there are not always answers to everything. Sometimes there are just problems that just keep going. And it's the quest to solve the problem that makes a life.
You know, it's not typical of Nietzsche, but he has a quote, I actually reference it in our current newsletter here at the Holter, but Nietzsche says all of great art has to do with gratitude.
Yeah.
You think?
Yes, sir.
Frank, my name's Sean. We communicated an email a little bit.
Oh, okay, that's right. You're the couple.
We're the couple. So fortunate for the rest of you.
There's a story here.
About 5 or 6 years ago, I was online on an online auction, and I saw one of Frank's pieces. I kept coming back to it because I was really drawn to it, and was successful ultimately in winning the bid. And it's a triptych part of Frank's Koi series, and we hung it in a room. And I found myself over the first couple of weeks that we had it, every time I walked in the room, I just a sense of happiness and joy that came over me. So I reached out to Frank and emailed him and told him this. Just thank you because.
See that $10 I gave him when he came in? The painting that he bought, I had made in Philadelphia. There's a great big clothespin, and that was put there by a big art collector who loved art, and he hired Klaus Holtenberg to make that piece for Philadelphia. And he found my work late in his life, and he bought 4 or 5 really large paintings.
Wow.
And then he built this big apartment, and he had me hanging with Miro and with Kandinsky and all these people, and I was like, he says, that's where you belong. You know, don't tell me. I'm happy with it, you know. So anyway, when he passed away, his family just dumped these things into an auction, and you ended up with it. So
I wonder if you might speak more about the Koi series.
well, they were born out of, real briefly, I'll say, when I was living in the forest. If you've never lived in a forest, it's an experience, because in a forest there's no horizon line, and the sky is only seen in little bits. And after several months of this, I said to myself, you know, this must be what it's like to be a fish. Because you live in an immersive world, it's all around you. So I was making a big drawing of leaves, and I recognized that I could turn them into fish. And that's how I started. And I did a lot of reading, and one of the things that I studied in college was the arts of Asia, and I know the importance of the koi as a symbol, and so it had all the elements of things that I like. You know, it has a hidden story, it has a meaning, and I have to tell you that in Asia, I have sold more than 50 big ones of those in Singapore alone, but in Hong Kong. I'm in Beijing. I'm all over Asia, you know, because Asian people really, really relate to those. And so that was good. So but anyway, the guy who owned that piece, his name was Jack Walton. He put that clothespin in Philadelphia. He built those big buildings across from City Hall in Philadelphia. And he was a big collector of art. And he was a big benefactor of museums and other things. And when he died, he left a prize to Temple University. It's the largest single prize for an artist in the United States that is given out once a year to an artist of note. So he really cared about art, and I was very touched that he became a friend of mine. And when I was making his headboard for his bed, and he had a stroke, and he was in the intensive care at University of Pennsylvania Hospital. I get a message: Jack wants you to come see him. And I had to come in. He had to approve the color. And so he put his finger on the color, and then somebody else signed the paper. And it was so strange that this man cared so much about art that I felt like I was invading his intense privacy. But everyone's, you know, there are a lot of great people who support museums. And I hope all of you support this place, because what they're really trying to do is what really needs to be done. If you want to help turn a city around, build a great museum. It will bring more crowds than any sports arena will ever bring you. It'll bring more wonderful things than any factory will. The greatest example in the world is Bilbao. The city was totally transformed by a single museum. You can read up on it, but it is completely a different city than it was 40 years ago. And it's all because of one building, a museum. Right? So
Thank you,
keep that in
Frank.
mind. We done?
Yeah.